Yes,
Thank,
started. Yeah.
thank you, Simon. All right, let's get started today. Today is the Hartford Subcommittee of the MARB, and it is Thursday, May 1st, and I'm calling the meeting to order for the Hartford MARB. And today we're just really going to focus on the city's budget and as well as the Board of Ed. And Kevin, do you have any other opening remarks?
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. White is coming. Okay. So the next item on the agenda today is approval of the minutes. The May 2nd special meeting that took place of 2024. Those minutes were not approved at the subcommittee in January because we did not have a quorum. And the draft minutes have been distributed again. And if anybody has any questions, if not, I am open for a motion to approve those minutes, please.
So moved. I'm relying on the accuracy of the minutes. My memory doesn't go back that far.
Thank you, Bob. Can I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Lisa. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right. Any abstentions? I didn't hear Stephen respond.
Yes,
Stephen?
I said aye.
Thank you. Just want to make sure. All right, now we're going to move on to the January 23rd, 2025 minutes of the subcommittee, and those minutes were included in your package. And if you don't have any questions, then let's move on for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Thank you,
Second.
Lisa. Who said second?
Second, Kevin.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. All right. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. All right.
I'm going to abstain. I was not at that meeting, I don't believe.
Okay. And one abstention. Okay, those minutes have been approved. Thank you. Stephen. All right, let's, the third item on the agenda today is to discuss the Board of Education FY26 budget. Leanne's here. And the subcommittee has been given copies of the superintendent's proposed 25-26 operating budget. And you're going to find that the Board of Ed had presented this at today's meeting. And I guess the follow-up of this budget is that it is showing a $14.7 million deficit that we want to talk about today. And that we were provided some additional information, which is $3 million has an assumption from the state and an additional $5 million. Do I have that? No, $3 million from the city and $5 million from the state. And that will leave an overall deficit of a 6.7. So I'm going to turn it over to either Caitlin or Paul to, I don't think the superintendent is with us, to walk us through the budget today.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm going to start and I'm going to give a little bit of the context and then Caitlin's going to walk you through the budget. I will say, and Caitlin will talk about this, that the 6.7, we do have that solved for. And so ultimately in the budget that was voted by the board on the 15th of April, we do have a solution for that 6.7. So Caitlin will talk about that. So what we're going to do today, we can go ahead to the next slide. Again, I'm going to give a little context. Caitlin will walk you quickly through our proposed budget. And we'll also add that the Board of Ed did submit a formal request to the City Council at the time that our budget was presented last week to the City Council. And so we'll share the details on that as well. So just jumping forward into the timeline for our budget process, just to, obviously it's a long process. Everybody knows that. This is meant to just highlight, the various ways in which we engage with the community and engage in getting feedback as we went through the budget building process. And again, as I said, the board voted to adopt a budget on the 15th of April. On the 23rd, I believe, we then presented that budget to the City Council. So going to the next slide. really, just our overall context and what we've been, we continue to struggle with relatively flat revenue. Well, Caitlin will give more details on our revenue picture for next year. FY26 will be the final year of the phase-in of additional funding under ECS. So that does help a little bit. But generally speaking, revenue's flatter than expenses. And we have rising costs that are driven really by three big things. Again, Caitlin will give the details on this, but tuition, transportation, salary increases, and then there's a little bit of our increasing expenses. They're just general inflation across sort of all areas of the budget. We've been pursuing a two-pronged approach, right? So we've been doing our deficit mitigation work. And as I said, we did get to, there are a couple assumptions that you mentioned, right? Around the $3 million from the city and the $5 million from the state. Outside of those assumptions, the budget is balanced. But we continue with our legislative advocacy. I think folks know there's been a lot of conversation at the state level this year, particularly around special education costs. We continue to advocate with other communities around Connecticut around that issue. We're also mindful of we're operating in a space of a lot of fiscal uncertainty in terms of what's going to happen in terms of federal funding. So we realize that has impacts on the state conversation and the advocacy at the state level. So going to our next slide, we just want to highlight two things because I think this time last year, we went through a very challenging budget last year. We cut on the order of 387 positions from the system. Some of that was the expiration of COVID release funding, and some of it was the ongoing structural deficit. And I think we have a slide later where we'll talk about, we're in a 10-year cycle of cutting every year. And the only exception to that was when we had COVID relief dollars. But just want to emphasize, right, there were three parallel inquiries that were launched by the State Board of Education, really in response to the fiscal situation we were facing last year. There were some claims made around unspent grant funding. We just wanted to make sure we circled back and close the loop on that with MARB by highlighting. So Public Works was the consulting company that engaged in an assessment of the Board of Ed's fiscal management. And there was no evidence of misspending. There was also no evidence of underspending. So I know last year when I was in front of you, I shared that we'd spent 99% of our grant funds in each of the last 4 years. And that was essentially verified, right? There was no evidence of sitting on a bunch of money that hasn't been spent. And I will also say relative to management or allocation of funds, use of funds, the other thing with Public Works, they, having gone through an exhaustive review of our finances and our budgets, made a single recommendation of cutting 3 positions that would save $400,000 a year. And we are acting, by the way, on the 60-something recommendations that came from Public Works, which are mostly around system and process issues, and that one recommendation around position reductions. But the reality is, I think everybody should be aware that $400,000 in savings doesn't solve a $30 million deficit. And then I'll also highlight that the Blue Ribbon Commission, which we really appreciated the mayor launching that, and again, providing an opportunity to really take a look at the system as a whole. And one of the big findings there was there are, right, structural issues that exist within, but also in the broader context that the Hartford Public Schools operate in that are creating structural fiscal challenges. So if we go to the next slide, when I say structural fiscal challenges, this is what I'm talking about, right? We have a $30 million deficit. That's what we started our budget season with. That's premised on revenue going up by about 2%, expenses going up by about 5%. And again, the vast majority of the increases are in the space of tuition, particularly special education tuition, transportation, same thing. It's primarily transportation for door-to-door services for special education students. And then salary increases related to contractual, particularly to contractual agreements. So moving to the next slide, I'll highlight the one in particular. So we've already shared with MARB our new teachers contract. And this is in the context of really struggling to fill positions. So for most of this school year, we've had 180 teacher vacancies in the Hartford Public Schools. And that translates to children in classes without a licensed teacher in front of them way too often. And so we did negotiate a new contract with our teachers. I think we're very excited about the contract. You can see what it means, particularly for newly hired teachers. That was a big focus in our negotiations to move the bottom of the scale. We're still middle of the pack, even with this new contract within Hartford County. But previous to this contract, we were the lowest paid teacher union anywhere in Hartford County at almost every lane in the pay scale, particularly at the entry level. And so if you go to the next slide, right? This is what we're trying to solve with a new contract. And you can see the vacancies as of December in the middle column there, and you see, 55, 56 special education teacher vacancies. And I want to emphasize, it costs money to increase salaries, but particularly in the special education space, if we don't provide services mandated in a child's IEP because we don't have the staff to provide the services, we incur compensatory services, and we have to pay, it costs us more if we don't have staff and seats providing the services that are mandatory in the student's IEP. So the last thing I'll do in terms of context is talk about this issue of scale, right? In the Hartford schools, we went through a round, this was before my time, but in 2018, Hartford Public Schools went through a round of closings and consolidations that impacted 12 facilities. And that resulted in about 15 million in savings over 3 years. So there's two things there, right? Moving through a process of closing and consolidation does have savings. It doesn't have savings at the scale of the deficits that we've had to address over the last 10 years. So I just want to emphasize, it's not a magic bullet in addressing the structural issues, but I think there's full awareness on the part of our board that a conversation needs to start about the next round and what that looks like. But I just want to be really clear that, you think about impacting 12 facilities and realizing 15 million in savings, you're talking about a little bit more than $1 million per facility you impact when you do closings and consolidations. And this slide is just highlighting that there are other benefits besides the cost savings of consolidation, right? Ultimately, in a school with a larger enrollment, you're able to offer more programming to the students in that school than you are in a school with a small enrollment. And then the last slide is I think what everybody here knows, and it's part of the structural issues we're talking about, which is the continuing trend of declining enrollment. The one thing I do want to emphasize here is, and we talked a little about this last year, you see pretty steep declines really starting in around 14, 15, 15, 16, and then running through 21, 22, or 22, 23. Our enrollment has been pretty flat for the last 4 years. There's sort of modest declines, and I would say it's too soon to know if this is a true leveling off, and we're going to stay in this 16,500-ish range for the foreseeable future, or if that sort of pause in the decline was driven by kind of family choices during the pandemic, and the previous trend will continue. So it's really too early for us to know the answer to that question. And there's also, right, in the chef agreement plan over the next few years to add several thousand more seats in the magnet open choice environment. And so depending on how that moves forward, that obviously could impact enrollment as well. So I'm going to stop there and hand it over to Caitlin, who's going to walk through that's this context setting for what we're going to talk about in terms of the choices we made for the budget this year.
Thanks, Paul, and good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm going to take a deeper dive into the finances. And so this is high-level overview of, as Paul shared, we started with a $30 million deficit due to some of those cost drivers, special ed, tuition, transportation. We then made a set of initial reductions, and so those totaled $15.3 million of reductions to our budget. We also know we will be receiving additional $3 million from the city, and we're really grateful for that. We also have a placeholder in here for additional state funding. This is partly based on the state's contribution in the current fiscal year of $5 million, but it's also based on tracking the legislative action. There's a lot of energy right now around special education in particular. So we've been tracking several different bills that have various proposals for providing more funding for special education, and do feel pretty confident that something is going to happen, and have taken kind of a more conservative estimate of the total dollar amount that could mean for us next year. That left us with this $6.7 million that was mentioned. And then at our April board meeting, the board voted to make an additional set of reductions. We're calling those high risk reductions because they were even closer to the student experience than the initial set. But they voted to make those reductions to balance that budget. And so that brings us to that 30 million mitigated, 22 million of those being reductions, 3 million being the additional from the city, and then 5 being that placeholder for state funding. To take a closer look at some of those specific reductions. Oops, sorry, my screen froze. There we go. One moment. There we go. This shows the specific reductions that we made, separated into that initial set of reductions and then the high-risk reductions. So some of the categories include school-level staffing, so teacher and support professional positions, and I'll share in a few slides the specific FTE changes. Some of our floating security guard positions, so they're not attached to a specific school, but float across the district. We had a magnet supplement, so additional funding for magnet schools that used to be much higher in the past and was being phased out over time as we moved to a more equitable funding system. So this year was going to be the last year of that funding. So that contributes to some of the savings. I'm just going to talk through those initial ones first, then I'll move to the high risk pieces. So tracking those initial reductions, you can see a lot of central office reductions, so about 40 positions, primarily managerial. Again, you'll see some of the data on that in a few slides. Also some non-personnel expenditures at the district office level. And then finally, a reduction target. So special education door-to-door transportation is one of our biggest cost drivers, especially out of our transportation, that's the majority of it. And so what this is we're still going to be providing services to students who have door-to-door in their individualized education plan, but it's really setting up a process to monitor how that gets assigned. Is it truly needed? Because it's about $13,000 per student to offer that. And so this is really saying we want to set up a better internal process for assessing that, evaluating that, and assigning that service to students. Those were the initial set of reductions that totaled 15.3 that we made. The next set of reductions were, again, what we called high risk, just because they were closer to the student experience. So that included things like graduation supports for students. So we have student support in Success Centers and Hope Academy, and also a contract with Opportunity Academy that are really helping some of our high school students who need additional support. It also includes contracts for Ready CT and CT Rise that are career pathways at the high school level and ninth grade academies to help ninth graders stay on track. It includes some of our community schools contracts with external partners. So we will be continuing those that have grant funding, but we will not be continuing any that do not have grants that are covering it. We also will be eliminating assistant principal positions for our smallest schools. So we have 5 schools with less than or fewer than 250 students. So we will be removing the assistant principals at those sites. We'll be reducing some building and grounds, non-personnel expenditures. And then finally, we were looking at our health clinics. So we do get state grants and then insurance reimbursements for part of our health clinics, but there's about $1 million that we are funding directly out of our general fund. So we'll be eliminating that $1 million, which translates to our dental clinic. So I just want to emphasize these are really hard reductions to make. They're things that really benefit our community and our students. But we did move forward with it in the effort to have a balanced budget. And it was an attempt to cut at some of the things that are slightly further from the core instructional experience. But again, still really difficult decisions. This gives a visual of some of what we've talked through in our journey related to the deficit. So blue is revenue, green is expense. You can see that far left set of bars is our FY25, so current year adopted budget that was balanced. You then see in the second set of charts, that's where we saw this $30 million gap. So projected revenue to grow slightly, but expenses to grow much more based on some of those cost drivers we've talked through. So starting with that $30 million gap. Then in the second to right chart is our initial set of mitigation. So through some of those revenue assumptions, which also included just all the grant funds that we know about on both the revenue and expense side, and making that 15.3 of initial reductions, that's where we were sitting a few weeks ago relative to the gap. So we still had that 6.7 left. And then our board at the April meeting voted to make an additional set of those 6.7 of high risk reductions to achieve balance. So you can see on the right is now our amended budget that is balanced at the 452.1. To take a deeper dive into revenue, this is where you'll see the different buckets that make up our revenue sources, with the top bar being this current fiscal year, the next bar being projected for next year. You'll see the education cost sharing and the city of Hartford are consistent, so the same from year to year. Where you'll see that increase in ECS funding from the state is actually in state grants. So any increase we get comes in the form of the Alliance grant because we're an Alliance district. So that's where you'll see the increase to ECS funding from the state. It's also where you'll see some of the increase to the excess cost grant that occurred both this year and is planned for next year. And then you'll see in that federal section also a slight increase. That's due to including one grant, it's North Hartford Ascends Pipeline Grant. So that's about $2.5 million supporting 5 schools in North Hartford. And then there's also an increase there for it is comprehensive support improvement schools. So our lowest performing schools are getting additional funding. It's federal dollars, it flows through the states, and then those are essentially our turnaround schools that are working on using those dollars to make improvements. You'll then see separately, there's that assumption of the $5 million from the state in green, and then the city of Hartford additional contribution of $3 million at the end, with then that gradient showing the additional ask for 6.7 that our board formally made to the city council. And we'll show you the text of that request, but this is how it's depicted revenue-wise. So it's asking to take us from the 452.1 to the 458.8. We also shared this with the city council just to give a sense of historical data on the city contribution. So the city contribution has been flat in total dollars for the past 12 years, I believe, to the Board of Education. And this shows just from 2020, looking at it per pupil. So this is taking into account the enrollment decline and then adjusting for inflation. And so I think a key takeaway here is that we actually have $13 million less to work with next year compared to the year prior to the pandemic because of that change to inflation. And so enrollment is declining, but inflation is increasing at a greater rate, which means we actually have fewer dollars available per student and then in total to support our school system. And so that's part of the advocacy, and the ask to the city was to try to get closer to at least keeping up with inflation. This shows the expense side, and you can see current year is on the left, next year is on the right. A key takeaway from this, so that orange part of this donut chart is fixed expenses. So that includes tuition, transportation, and utilities. And you can see that's going from 33% in the current year to 37.8% next year. And then you can see the other parts of the donut chart. So school budgets are about 50% of that in the dark green. And then central office support, services, administration are the smaller slices of the donut. All of those decrease because that's where we had to make cuts to make room for some of those fixed expenses because we have very little control over those areas of the budget. This is the FTE slide I was referencing that shows with that 6.7 million included the changes at both the central office and the schools. At the central office, you'll see the managerial positions I mentioned, the floating security guards, and that dental clinic, which is about 10 positions added there as well. Including also, we made additional reductions to our instructional coaches in those high-risk reductions. So it's about 58 positions at the central office level. That's 16% of central office staff. At the school level, it's about 56 positions. You can see primarily in the teaching positions with some support positions as well. That's about a 2% reduction at school sites. And so obviously most of our budget is located at the school sites, so we did have to make reductions there, but definitely a smaller percentage than the percentage at the central office level. And to put this in historical context, so this is where you can see year over year, the deficit needed to be mitigated and then how that translates into FTE changes. And we've now added that FY26 with those numbers for the school and central office. And what this chart shows is that over the last 11 years, Hartford Public Schools has mitigated almost $200 million in costs and eliminated 645 positions in this effort to balance the budget. And again, that's largely been driven by this flat revenue and then increasing costs for salaries, for tuition, special education, transportation. So just to keep up with those fixed expenses, the trade-offs have had to come from staff at the schools and the central office. COVID was the only time that cuts were not needed to be made. But other than that, the pattern has really continued. based on that, we've been really focused on the legislative advocacy. So this just shows some of the priorities we've had relative to state advocacy. And just want to emphasize our major focus right now is around the special education funding. So there's a current bill, House 7277, that is proposing a grant equivalent to a weight, so a 50% weight in the ECS formula for special education. I was at the Capitol last week. I know the mayor was there too, which we really appreciated. Some of our staff, we had students there as well, really advocating for this change. There are also some other bills out there that are proposing changes for special education and include a funding component. So we're really tracking that. We're mobilizing a lot of folks around it because this is for sure a place where there needs to be some structural change. So that's the state advocacy piece. We've also been focused on working with the city to understand if there are additional pieces we can have support with funding. So what this slide shows is in that 6.7 request to the city for additional funding, what we would intend to fund with it. A lot of the things are the last things we cut from the budget, so the things that were the hardest to get rid of and really impact our student experience. But it's not an exact match, so I'll just talk through some of these items. The pieces that come from the high-risk reductions are our student support and success centers. So again, that's graduation support. Some of those community school partnerships that are not funded through grants. Hope Academy, which is another set of graduation supports for students. Opportunity Academy, which helps some of our most disengaged youth. The career pathways and ninth grade academy work. So again, some high school support. And then some of those instructional coaching positions that are really aligned with our strategic plan for next year and focused on support for teachers, growing their practice, focusing on literacy. And then the last piece of this, so Deputy Foster had shared with you earlier some of our vacancies this year. We are projecting to have fewer vacancies next year than the current year. So in the current year, we had about a 12% vacancy rate for teachers. We're projecting to be closer to 6 next year based on those contract updates. And so part of this is asking to actually lower that vacancy rate, which really would put us in a better financial position for just unintended things related to vacancies. You know, we do our best to make assumptions relative to the data we have now, to the changes we're making next year, but this would give us more room to be able to continue to fill those roles, teachers, support professionals to support students. So this was the specific ask to the city if this is what we would use the money for if we were able to get additional funding. And the last piece I'll share is just this is the text of the formal motion and resolution that our Board of Education made. And you can see it includes just some of that historical data I talked through. So the number of cuts that have been made over the past several years, the reductions that have been made in this current year, and then the formal request for the additional 6.7. So at this point, we've balanced the budget. Again, there is that assumption around state funding, but we're tracking the legislative work. And then we also will be working with listening for updates from the city on if they're able to provide any more funding to us. I will stop there and pause for any questions or comments.
Thank you for your presentation. And I have to say, I really like the format and how you've laid things out. And we can also see how the trends have grown and where the headcount is and where some of your challenges are. So this is very, very helpful for all of us. Board members, any questions?
I'll just wanted to say quickly, if I could, both of you, thank you very, very much for both this presentation and all of the work that you do every day to manage this. And I'm frankly amazed that you were able to deliver that in a relatively upbeat tone, because I think it is, I say this personally, completely insane that there is another headline about the record surplus that our state has in the richest state in the country, in the richest place on earth, and we are allowing our capital city year after year after year to face this. And it is appalling to me. And I am really sorry that you and so many people in Hartford have to keep dealing with it, because the state does not take seriously the challenges that you are facing, and how embarrassing it is that you have to eliminate a dental clinic because we cannot find a way to help you. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Bob.
Yes, again, thank you very much for the clarity in which you present bad news. A while ago, I think the superintendent said one of the mitigating things they were trying to do was to develop an in-house capability, a better in-house capability to deal with special ed. And I'm just wondering how that initiative is going. I noticed that you, as you pointed out, there were 56 vacancies in special ed. So is that still a viable mitigation measure?
I can speak to that. Yes, it is a viable mitigation measure. And one of the things we know, for example, is our excess. We don't have a single student in the Hartford Public Schools who qualifies for the excess cost grant who is served within a Hartford Public School, right? And just what I mean by that is, right, you only are eligible for excess cost when the per pupil cost for an individual student exceed 100,000. We don't have a single student served within our school that exceeds that cost level. And that's because it's just, we can do it at a much lower rate than sending students out of district. You're right, exactly right on vacancies, though. Essentially, we've had to put a pause on our efforts to expand in-district special education programming because we can't open up new classrooms if we don't have teachers to staff them. I think we are confident that our new teachers contract is going to be a significant move in helping to fill some of those positions. But also, frankly, across Connecticut, there is a pipeline issue with special education workforce. And so it absolutely would help us mitigate some of our structural issue if we could open more in-district special ed classrooms to serve students who currently are going out of district or future students who would go out of district. But until we fill those teacher vacancies, we're sort of paused in that.
Will there be, are there any institutional impediments to assuming you're able to get the teachers that someone's going to say, no, I still want to go out of district rather than stay here for whatever reason?
I mean, I think it is much more challenging to try to get a student who's already out of district back in. So that would be an impediment in terms of pulling students back, if you will. So I think really the focus has to be on future students not going out and staying internal to the district. I also should mention that in the governor's budget proposal for FY27, there was, I believe, a plan to include an amount of money to do some pilots in districts around expanding special education program offerings. And so we're certainly aligned with and supportive of that. But really, the biggest impediment really is the workforce. I think we can get around the other things.
Thank you.
Lisa.
Thank you. Yeah, Bob, just to respond to your question as well, usually when you build in-district capacity for special education, it requires an upfront cost, and then it would result in long-term savings, but there's an immediate cost upfront as you build out your space and build out the staffing that you need. And as Paul mentioned, once you outplace a student, families are reluctant to then move their kids back in district once they've been settled out in an outplacement. So I had a few questions. The first was, you have that slide in your PowerPoint that talks about when you reconfigured schools in 2018. I know that this is before everybody here's time, but when you did that reconfiguration, I'm guessing that you used enrollment projections that showed that you would indeed have declining enrollment. And so I'm guessing that you right-sized to the enrollment with which you are approximately. Is that a correct assumption?
I think it's a correct assumption that we right-sized to the projected enrollment at that time. But I also know that if the superintendent were here, I've heard her say this many times, if she were here, she would say that even at the time that we did that, she was public in saying we would have to do it again. And part of that is just because we knew that, the chef settlement was, I believe the 2018 consolidation was prior to the final settlement, which was reached in 2020. Yeah. And so I think there was an awareness even then that we were going to have to circle back to that conversation.
Got it. And so Kevin, I love your enthusiasm. And when you're done in the treasurer's office, please come and join me professionally at the School and State Finance Project. I will say that Hartford Public Schools is very uniquely impacted by the state's response to the chef agreement. So all those structural issues that keep being referred to, that is a state, it is how the state has decided to set up tuition and cost liabilities here in the state. And unfortunately, Hartford has the most kids that are exercising choice as a result of that agreement. I do think that the high risk reductions that you laid out, I feel that they are extremely painful. And it hurts me to look at that list of reductions that will be made to students in Hartford Public Schools if that actually needs to occur. And lastly, I hate to be a little bit of a Debbie Downer, and I feel like I have my Jeffrey Beckham hat on, but an additional $5 million from the state based upon the appropriations budget and the governor's budget, I think is a very, and what we've seen come out in terms of bills and actually funding being proposed at this time is a very aggressive target. So I would just say, continue to lobby your legislative delegation if you want to ensure that that $5 million is ultimately provided to the state. Provided to Harvard Public Schools, even with the increase in the excess cost funding that has been proposed, excess cost claims and reimbursement claims across state continue to rise at such a level that even with an increase of $40 million, you might still just be flat funded, which is unfortunate. So that $5 million at this time seems aggressive to me. So I would just say, you have a few weeks to continue to lobby and try to make that happen. That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Kim.
You're
Well, I'll
welcome.
say we are for sure continuing our lobbying efforts. And just to give context on the 5, like we know it's aggressive. I think we settled on that number largely because last year after we adopted our budget, there was a one-time $5 million infusion. And so we said, okay, we'll take that number. But I'll just echo what you said on excess cost. Like we were sort of enthusiastic when we first heard the 40 million for FY25. But then when we actually talked to the folks at the state who administer it, that might be $1 million for us. It just doesn't translate to a lot more. And so I guess I'm just echoing that point.
So you've asked for 2 things, I would say, is the 5 million in addition to if you put back the high risk is the 6.7, because that's not covered either. So really we're looking at the 11.7.
Yes.
Okay. One other thing, Caitlin, you had mentioned, possibly Paul, you may be aware, what are the other legislative bills that are out there for education that you're monitoring? You told us about one, but I did hear in your commentary that there are others. So it'd be helpful that we could take a look at them.
Yeah, so the 7277 that I mentioned is the 50% weight for special education, and that translates to about 16 million for Hartford Public Schools. Again, we're not confident that that is actually going to happen in its entirety, but that is the one we've done some advocacy around. There also are both Senate and House bills. It's like bill number 1, and they started off being quite vague. It was just like fixed special education. And I think those ones are getting more meat put around them at this time. I'll also say that, so the governor did the budget, and then the appropriations committee did put in that increased access cost, that 40 million for FY26. It was only in there for FY27 for the governor. And then actually the vote related to the appropriations committee was to fully fund the excess cost grant. So the other nuance about excess cost is that it's only for cost 4.5 times the average per pupil, but the state has only funded it at about 70%. So there was a vote to increase that to 100%, which would be more than the 40 million, but we're also not confident that is going to make it into the final budget. So there's a few different pieces happening, but we are seeking to get more clarity on some of those other special education bills separate from 7277. I don't know if Paul, if there's anything I missed in that.
There was another bill, and I need to look it up because I'm not going to remember the number off the top of my head, that had sort of the fix everything all at once version of ECS, which is beautiful. Like, I don't know that it has any chance of passage at all, but that was one that actually was increasing, added a weight for special education, increased the weights for multilingual and economically disadvantaged, and increased the foundation or base amount in ECS, right? Because that's the other thing, is the per pupil amount in ECS hasn't changed, I don't think, since 2014. So the amount that Connecticut is saying it costs to educate a student hasn't changed since 2014. So, we talked about inflation earlier. I mean, that was, I'll have to find that bill number.
It's 1511. It's Senate and House Bill 1511 is that one.
We were very enthusiastic to just see that put in a bill. I mean, I don't think it has, I mean, I can't imagine what the price tag on that would be across the state. It would be staggering.
Thank you.
It's
Listen.
$540 million, the price tag of that bill that you're referring to. That's the disconnected youth bill that didn't make it out of the Appropriations Committee. And then the other bill, Kim, is 1561. There was also a special education transportation grant that was in that bill, but no price tag, and also didn't make it out of the Appropriations Committee.
Thank you. Any other questions? So thank you very much for your in-depth conversation and teaching us about where you're heading this upcoming fiscal year budget, and you'll get an opportunity to do this again on May 15th and with the full MARB. And at that time, if you do find any other additional bills that we're not aware of, please don't hesitate to shoot it off to the OPM team so that we can keep an eye on those. And one other thing, the report from Public Works, could you share that report with OPM? I don't think that we've received that, have we? OPM team, John or Simon?
We can definitely share it either way.
No, we haven't received it.
Okay.
Okay.
That would be helpful for us to see. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Let's move on to agenda item number 4, and this will be review, discussion, possible action of the Hartford's Mayor FY26 recommended budget. I want everybody to remember that Hartford is now a Tier 2 municipality, and according to the statute, we are not here to review and approve when we get to the full MARB all of their line items within the budget, strictly some revenue items. And from that, we've also included today the grand list. I'm going to turn it over to the city, either the mayor or Julian, to bring us up to date. Mayor?
Hey guys, so unfortunately I have to jump at 10:50, so I'm gonna get it started, and then Julian's unfortunately gonna have to do most of this. But Julian, I don't know if you have access to throw the slides up.
Yes. May I share screen? Okay, thank
Yes.
you.
Sorry, Mayor, I wasn't aware of this, your time limit.
That's all right. So our fiscal year 2026 budget is a $626 million budget, which maintains our existing mill rate, 68.95 mills, which is still by a pretty significant chunk the highest in the state, and maintains funding, maintains spending increases to 0.4%, which has taken an incredible amount of work from Julian and his team, and we really appreciate their effort in the midst of a number of negotiated wage increases and increases in salaries, across most of our unions now, that make up for a number of years in which many of our employees had 0% wage increases, and some real concerns over the long-term value of our grand list, which we'll get to in a moment. It continues to invest in our capital assets with general fund contributions, although you'll see that those contributions are less than previous years, which I don't want to kick that topic to Julian, but I think we will get to in future slides. I think you can go to the next one. There, we point out some targeted investments. I won't go into depth on any of these, but the first really makes up for federal cuts to violence prevention and efforts that we know statistically are having a real impact on crime in the city. Investments in early childhood deals with salaries for early childhood providers and staffing concerns we have there, environmental quality and compliance issues related to an MOU between the city, the Metropolitan District Commission, and the federal EPA. The city had not been meeting our clean water requirements for decades due to kind of political infighting between the MDC and the city of Hartford. And so this new MOU over our federal MS4 requirements will come with some costs, but makes good on some clean water initiatives that are long needed. An arts and culture position, and the $3 million in this year's budget to the Board of Ed, which was discussed before. Along with that, we are working through a process of with board members and the Board of Ed to try to identify savings through consolidation of back-end functions. We've identified as a starting point, finance department, HR department, facilities, that as areas that the city would like to take on our books and consolidate some of the services around to allow the Board of Ed to spend more of their dollars on within schools, within classrooms. In addition to that, there's also conversations, as was mentioned, around consolidation of schools. I think it's really important that those conversations focus on creating the schools itself that are centers of excellence, and primarily and secondarily on the budgetary implications, the stretching of special ed staff, of coaches, of arts programs, of just capacity among 39 different schools in a number of different buildings has made it tougher to create individual schools, especially among our high schools. We've got 11 of those across the district. Create economies of scale that allow for centers of excellence within our schools. So both of those processes are ones that we've begun conversations around, and follow some of the work that came out of our Blue Ribbon Commission. The revenue summary is the next slide. I think I'm already at time, so I'm sorry, Julian, to throw this to you right in the middle, but I think I have to jump. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get through more of this.
Okay, so you can see here the overall our revenue picture shows a fairly modest increase of the 0.4% on the property tax side, which is our single largest source of revenue. We are continuing to see the impact of tax appeals from the last revaluation, sort of limiting the ability of the grand list to grow year over year. Fortunately, in the current year budget, we had anticipated the impact of a lot of those appeals. And so, anticipating that and having built in the impact of some of those appeals does, mitigate some of the negative impact it would have on projecting taxes for next year. And we've continued to assume that there will be additional reductions to the grand list value from ongoing tax appeals right through next year and the following year. There is also a slight negative impact as a result of the change in the state rules for how motor vehicles are valued and the depreciation schedule that's used. The city did opt to use the local option for a somewhat less impactful depreciation schedule. So the impact of that change was moderated somewhat in the end. Intergovernmental revenue, which is almost entirely made up of state aid to the city, including the ECS grant, some minor reductions there in our pilot payment, and small reduction in the amount we receive for the motor vehicle cap reimbursement. And then some other minor changes in some of the other categories. We are anticipating lower collections on interest income based on the treasurer's office projections. We have a small uptick in our building permits projected, and the net result of all of that is a 0.4% increase, which gave us just shy of $2.5 million additional dollars to work with in the budget. Just focusing in on those assumptions that are part of the MARB's review and approval process. the statute focuses on the assumptions around property taxes and the mill rate, and then state aid to the city. So we just noted here that the property tax collections are based on the grand list, which was generated in October, just shy of $4.8 billion. We have our local mill rate of 68.95 mils, which applies to real estate and personal property. And of course, the capped mill rate of 32.46 for motor vehicles. And our tax collection rate is set by city ordinance. It's based on the last 3 audited years collection rate. And so the collection rate for FY26 is 95.46%. And again, that's based on a straight calculation. And then the small table there in the corner of the screen is just showing that our assumptions for state aid is based on the governor's proposed budget. The only discrepancy in the numbers that you'll see there is in the ECS, and Caitlin mentioned this during her presentation as well, is the 187.9 million is the base or core ECS, and the delta between that number and the larger number in the governor's budget is the Alliance grant, which is factored into the Board of Ed budget. Those dollars flow directly to the Board of Ed. So our state aid is aligned with the governor's proposed budget for next year. This is our expenditure summary. We continue to work through our labor agreements, and you'll see an increase in our payroll there of 2.2%. Our insurances are up. That's driven almost entirely by our projected health insurance increase. Some of the claims experience and the moderation in claims experience we'd seen over the last several years, but we're seeing it start to tick up again. And our projections from the city's health insurance consultant indicated that we needed to build this increase into our budget. The debt and other capital, the reduction there reflects what the mayor mentioned earlier, is a reduction in the general fund contribution to the capital improvement plan. We did offset that with some other repurposing of other resources, which we'll see a little bit later in the slide deck. And then you'll see some of the other operating increases, some increases in Metro Hartford Innovation Services. That's our IT operation. Some investments in upgrading software and some of our equipment service contracts. The reduction in other non-personnel, that's largely the net effect of reducing a fund that we called the Special Development Fund. It was in our Development Services Department. It's about $900,000. It typically would go for a mix of uses in the development area, a lot of them one-time expenses or non-recurring expenses. We've moved that off budget, or funding that through existing appropriations from prior years to capital reserve and development reserve. There's also a reduction in the subsidy to the Gulf Enterprise Fund. Those are offset somewhat by an additional budgeted item for the MS4 or the stormwater compliance requirements of about $500,000, and the investments that the mayor mentioned previously for the crime reduction initiative, that was about $200,000. Again, just like the revenues, about 0.4% overall. These are just pie chart breakdowns of our on the expenditure side. You'll see that outside of education, which we segregate out there in the one section, payroll and benefits are the two largest components of our budget. This shows you the same thing again, with just excluding the education portion. This is our benefits, not including our pensions. And I'll just mention that on the pension side that we did budget for the full ADEC, as did the Board of Ed and the library. Outside of pension, our benefits are dominated by health insurance. It's $39 million in change there. These are some of the governing principles that we adhere to as we're developing the budget and the long-term plan. Obviously, trying to attract investment and growth to grow the tax base. A lot of the focus there is on downtown residential and converting office space where there are opportunities to residential. Spending discipline, working for making investments in all of the city's residential neighborhoods, and then continuing to invest in our infrastructure. The $13.3 million capital budget, about $3 million of that is coming from the general fund contribution. The balance is made up of a combination of prior projects as they are closed out. If they have any residual funds, those funds accrue to the capital reserve. So we're repurposing prior project funding to supplement the general fund contribution. And then this total also includes the $2.8 million LoCIP grant from the state that the city will be directing those funds to the pavement overlay program and some sidewalk repairs. That concludes the overview of our FY26 budget. Take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Julian, for that highlighted overview. Can you share your presentation with us after this meeting?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Oh, we lost Stephen. He's coming back. Hold on. Any questions from the members? Oh, Stephen, you got to go on mute. Well, first, congratulations on your GFOA and presentation, because that's always hard to continue with and to achieve. That's a lot more work than just doing a regular budget. So hats off to you, my friend, and
thank you for
and
that.
all your hard work. No,
We have a
can
very
really
solid team here in this office. And
fantastic.
doing an amazing job.
That's right. I understand that definitely is not the work of one person. So this is very informative, and we definitely appreciate it. I'm surprised, no questions. Oh, go ahead, Bob. Well, you waved your hand at me, but you're on mute.
It's probably better all around. But one of the things, and I think we can talk more about this when you do the 5-year plan, but the mayor was very concerned, appropriately so, last year, that of the commercial valuation. And I understand the reval will be October of next year. What is and you did talk about the tax appeals. Are they trending down? In other words, I guess, how worried should we be about the reval, given what's happening nationally with vacancy rates in commercial buildings and the difficulty, City Place is in receivership. The difficulty across the country of repurposing these buildings. A lot of them cannot be repurposed for apartments. Again, what is your thinking short-term and long-term?
I can give you a high-level backdrop on that. So we'll see in the 5-year plan, the projections for the 2026 reval which are based on the assessor's analysis of the most recent, sales data. So it's almost a snapshot in time as of now, were we to do revaluation now. And his projected reval impact does show that significant drop in commercial values, but simultaneously a considerable increase on the residential side. And so that's all, all kind of baked together. What he's seeing now, again, based on recent sales data, would yield an overall grand list increase of just shy of 14%. In terms of the tapering off of the appeals or the trend, I guess it's more of an unwinding of the appeals as they're kind of flowing through the court process and being reflected on our books and our grand list. What we've seen since the 2021 reval is appeals reductions resulting from tax appeals of roughly $155 million of value. We have built into the budget, so our revenue projections for next year assume another $50 million coming off as we start to, as we close out more and more of these cases. I'll just note that in addition to that, we've tucked away in a reserve fund $7.3 million to have on hand to address any further tax appeals that are above and beyond what we've built into the budget. So in terms of our revenues over the next several years, we feel like we've built in significant contingency or cushion into the budget for that, and then having that reserve fund on hand as well should help us get through. And then, of course, in 2026, we'll see the new revaluation and sort of a reset of everything.
There was a recent article about Aetna personal property being reduced. And I think that's a yearly issue. Is that taken into consideration for going forward next year?
Well, yes, it would be reflected in the grand list. So, yes.
Okay, I'll probably have another question when we get to the 5-year plan. Thanks, Julian.
Sure.
I think the 5-year plan would be helpful. Why don't we just hop over to that? I think that's going to possibly spark some more questions.
Okay.
Thank you, Julian. We'll look after we get through the 2 to see if there is any consideration for possible action today.
I'm going to share screen again. And you should see that momentarily. I can get it to. There we go. This is just the high level projection of the 5-year plan, the revenues and expenditures. You'll see FY 26 and 27 more or less just in balance, and then 28 would be the first reval year. And in the 2 years that follow that, through the 5-year period, we're in balance or projecting surpluses. No surpluses from 28 and beyond. Those could either be surpluses that roll to fund balance. They could be, it could be in the form of mill rate reduction. It could be in the form of other investments. But that's the delta between the projected revenues and expenditures. It equates to about 1.5% per year budget increases through the 5-year period. Our major revenue assumptions in this forecast are grand list at 1.5% per year. The exception to that is FY 28, which would be the revaluation year. And we built into this the roughly 14% increase in the grand list based on recent sales data. We've assumed no change in state aid through the planning period. We've assumed no increase in interest income through the planning period, and used 1% for all of the other revenue sources, 1% per year. Our major expenditure assumptions for payroll, it works out to an average of 3.1% per year. We are using an attrition factor of 9.5% for FY27 through 2030, and that's based on historical averages. We have health insurance increasing at 7% per year. All of the assumptions for the pension ADEC are based on our actuary firm's updated 5-year forecast. We have built into this the first, and the mayor has mentioned this in several venues. I don't recall if we discussed it at all with MARB yet. We are proposing that the city begin to dip its toe back into the borrowing arena. We have built into this plan the use of $25 million of general obligation bonds for critical infrastructure, and also $25 million for lease purchasing for fire apparatus, heavy equipment for public works, and some information technology infrastructure and security upgrades. And then on the education side, you'll see that we've got the education at the current level through the planning period, and looking at the expenditure side as our opportunities for building capacity and education by consolidations, efficiencies, and where those might free up funds for the Board of Ed to direct towards their direct services. These are some of the major initiatives being spearheaded by, we're involving the mayor's office at this point. The mayor already talked a little bit about the education, the Blue Ribbon Commission, looking at finding opportunities to consolidate services over the next year, providing the $3 million of bridge funding for FY26. I mentioned that the proposal for borrowing, the $25 million for NGO bonds, $25 million as lease purchase. This would require the approval of the OPM secretary and the state treasurer based on our contract for financial assistance. City continues its focus on market rate and workforce housing and growing the tax base there. And we are working with the city treasurer to manage the long-term liability on the pension side. We've formed a task force to begin working on this, and that will hopefully help to manage and temper any future growth in the pension liability. And that's a quick overview. You have the full plan as part of your packet, which has more detail on all of that. I will stop sharing.
And if you can also share your highlighted presentation, that will be also helpful just to bring it up a notch. I know you have your narrative in front of all the budget.
Yes.
One question you did mention for the Board of Ed, the $3 million that you're putting in for FY26. And is it only 26 as a one-time fund and it's not to continue on as you're continuing to work through other measures of consolidation to counterbalance that $3 million?
Yes.
Okay. Now, does the Board of Ed, I know they're included in your plan, but yours is flat funded, of course, because it's an allocation to the board. Has the board done a 5-year plan as well, looking out? Caitlin or Paul?
I can speak. We did one last year. We have not updated that yet.
Okay. I think it would be helpful if you would do that. Not that just to see if you are in a line of where you're at, and then also what's anticipated out in the future, to keep your eye on that ball. Thank you. That's my first questions. And Lisa.
Just to follow up on, thank you, Kim. Just to follow up on your question. So that is something that I actually wrote down as a question to ask you with regards to your 5-year plan. There's a surplus that Hartford will presumably have in the future, and it's all slated to be used for a mill rate reduction. It says surplus or mill rate reduction. I would personally like to see it specifically call out increased investments to your school district. Municipalities across the state have to provide or do provide increased support for their schools. And I know that Hartford was in a very difficult financial position for many years. However, you are accruing surpluses looking forward into the future. And I would hope that Hartford would begin to increase its investments to its students and clearly lay that out in your 5-year plan. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Lisa. Bob. Oh, I can't hear you. Sorry.
Two things. One, to play off Lisa, I think there is another view on that. Well, I think the schools absolutely need to be addressed. I think the more Hartford contributes, the less pressure there is on the state. There's a structural deficit here, which gets my attention, and that can only be addressed by the state. So I'd like to keep the pressure on, but I certainly appreciate, other uses for Hartford money because the need is great. The second thing is, Julian, getting back to the commercial property and the mill rates. One of the concerns I have is that, commercial property can be small stores and it can be city place. It's the very large buildings that are in trouble, that I presume have in the past generated a lot of revenue. Is there in the assessor's evaluation, is that taken into effect? I mean, not all commercial properties are equal. All it takes is a real bath. I mean, I'm sure that whatever city place is in 26, it's going to be substantially less.
Well, I think I'd probably have to get with the assessor to get a more detailed response, but I think what we're seeing is a lot of the decline in values is we're sort of recognizing that as we go along through a lot of these tax appeals and in the current sales data. And so I'm not sure I fully grasp all of the what you were asking for, but it's a real-time estimate.
Yeah, and if I can jump in, Julian, the assessor has been settling a lot of claims, and we felt the effect of those tax appeals settling in fiscal year 25, where we've had, what is it, about $5 million in reductions to revenues, tax revenues in 25 from those appeals. I know there are a handful of the larger commercial buildings left, such as City Place. But he is working through the list, and Julian and I have built a pretty large conservative guess of what the results of those appeals would be into the grand list assumptions going forward.
That's helpful. Thank you, because I know that City Place sold for a loss a few years ago, but it seems that there's another big loss coming up, and that was my thing. But sounds like you're on top of it. Good luck.
Just one other data point to add to that. In our projections for the grand list in October of 26, we in addition to that percentage increase that we're assuming for the resulting from the reval, we also built in $150 $150 million reduction as a contingency on that number, which I didn't mention and probably should have, but that's factored into the 26 reval, which affects FY28.
Okay. And on the residential side, you predict a healthy bump. Is that in apartments? Is that in, no, I guess it's not. So that's in the neighborhoods. And I guess that's a good thing. I just wonder about affordability and, can people move, the people that are there, can they stay, or what, how does that work?
Well, I think you're right. The projections as they are now, or as based on what the assessor is seeing now, would result in a shift in tax burden. That's something that we and the mayor's office and us are going to have to work on, public outreach on that, and also, some of these other initiatives that we mentioned in the presentation. Part of the idea behind those is to try to increase those projected surpluses as much as possible to help moderate the impact on those residential taxpayers. And why we did reference that some degree of mill rate reduction will likely be part of where we end up there. I don't know what the balance will be between all of the different sort of competing pieces. But yes, you pinpointed that issue pretty well.
And I would also add to that, the residents are using the residential ratio, so it's not at the 68 mills, they're at whatever the residential ratio would be at that year. So currently at 36%. 36 mills, sorry.
Any other questions from the board?
Oh. Yeah, I don't want to, if there's another question, go ahead, someone else go ahead, but the economic development that you're talking about, you want some initiative, and that's obviously important. What kind of industry are you trying to attract to Hartford with any kind of incentives that you have?
Well, we have, the conversion projects, or the residential conversion projects that we mentioned earlier. That's one of the major areas of focus. And I know that there are, in that round, there's 11 projects or so, roughly 10 to 12 projects that are at various stages of approval. In the aggregate, are expected to add about 1,000 units over their, these are all sort of on the horizon within the next 5 years or so. So there's those. Beyond that, I think I'd probably want to get some input from our economic development department to respond more thoroughly to your question about some of the other specific initiatives that they're pursuing. If that's okay.
No, that's fine. It's a tough job, so thank you.
I do want to give kudos to Julian and his team for giving us a 5-year plan that is in balance without a mitigation measure. And he's heard that from me ever since we started working together. And now he's on over to Hartford, and he has closed that gap within the budgeting. So that makes me happy. I know that he'll be happy not to hear from me chirping in his ear.
Always happy to hear from
you. So that is good news. So if nobody else has any other questions, then I would ask if anybody is ready to entertain a motion to approve the FY26 mayor's budget and recommend it to the MARB.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Kevin. And do I have a second?
I'll second. I'll second.
Thank you, Bob. Any other discussion? I hear none. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Stephen, I don't know if I heard you.
Yep, aye, sorry.
Thank you. All right. Your budget has been approved. The motion carries. Thank you. Now I would like to hear from the members to hear if you are willing to entertain a possible action on the 5-year plan. The budget is the critical one at this moment because of May, but of course, if you're comfortable with the 5-year plan, I'm not going to ask for a motion yet until I hear if folks are comfortable. I have Mark Waxenberg chirping in my ear where he is talking about the Board of Ed. And so I cannot close my eyes to Mr. Waxenberg. God rest his peace, because we do miss him. Sorry, Bob. Well, are we willing to entertain a motion for the 5-year plan?
I would be comfortable doing that, but I'm not. I don't feel strongly if other people object.
Yeah, I would second. I'd go along with that. There may be a few questions here and there, but it's, I think it's the city's judgment on these things. I don't think that they're being unreasonable. Stuff is going to happen, but there it goes. And the federal issue is going to be a big deal, and we're not going to know that for a while. And I think there can be mid-year adjustments in the plan for disasters, but
agree. Very good points. Any other discussion?
Kim,
Yes.
I am too thinking about our fellow recently departed member of the Hartford Subcommittee. And he too would continue to emphasize an increase to the Board of Education. And so I would just like that terminology, if possible, just changed with regards to the surplus to acknowledge that it could be a possibility in the future of a future use of the surplus. Otherwise, I'm happy to support the plan with that adjustment.
That sounds reasonable to me.
It sounds very reasonable to me too. And we'll get another crack at this, but if you'll take that into consideration, Julian, and take that back to the mayor on this discussion regarding the Board of Ed and the surplus. All right. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Stephen. Come off mute, Stephen. Well, I have enough to have this motion carry, and your 5-year plan has been approved. I will, there we go.
Sorry about that. My phone wouldn't unmute, but I'm good.
Thank you. I thought so. All right. The motion has carried, and your 5-year plan has been approved, Julian. Great work to all of you. And that is a monument lift. I know that. And I'm glad to see that the Board of Ed and the city are working together. So that is good news as well. We did go over your capital plan. That was one of the items. Julian, one other question that I would have for you is, and I don't know if you're prepared to give an update, is on the refinancing of the bonds that the state is doing and has already been gone out to market, correct?
I think Leanne has some detail on that.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, we went out to market last week and we're
Yes.
in the final stages of closing it up. Closing call is scheduled for, I believe, May 21st.
May 21st. Okay. And that is for special obligation refunding bonds that for a series of 2025, the fiscal year 20 or not. I don't know if it's fiscal year. I think it's just the year 2025 for $116.5 million. So we wish you great success on that.
Thank you.
Because if they save money, we save money.
Exactly.
Any other items that anybody would like to bring to our attention under other? All right. Our next meeting is a full MARB meeting on May the 15th, and look forward to seeing everybody again. That will be at the LOB. And can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Kevin. I'll take a second from you, Lisa.
Thank you.
All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Hartford team. Good to see you. And we'll
Aye,
see you in
thank
2
you all.
weeks.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.